Welcome to today's edition of the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. I am Kevin Rogers for Thursday, February 25th, and we are excited because we have our first guest coming on. It is Tom Cunningham, who will join us in mere moments to talk about bracketology in college basketball as we're inching closer towards March Madness and Selection Sunday coming up in just a few weeks, and the conference tournaments already starting, actually. We have the Horizon League starting tonight. So you have conference tournaments beginning in the next few weeks. And as you see, we have Iowa, Michigan coming up this evening, and we'll talk about that with Tom as well. But before we get to Tom, this is the bracketology update right here. We're going to go over a lot of these rankings with Tom, or these seedings rather, and what he thinks. He put this together, what he thinks behind these seedings, where these teams belong. So without further ado, as they say, let's bring in our friend Tom Cunningham, who is here. Tom, good to talk to you again. How are you?
What's up, man? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. And first, before we get started, how long did it take you to put together that bracketology with these 68 teams? And I know you're updating it every few days to obviously reflect on what these teams have done. But how long did it take you to at least put together the initial bracketology?
Yeah, well, that took a little bit of time. I don't know if you know this or not, but I do update my own rankings every night. There's 347 schools this year. That's taking out the Ivy League and a few other schools that canceled the season. And so, it's a lot easier when you start at the beginning of the year and rank them as the season progresses. It makes life a little bit easier, but it still took a while to put together. But it's time well spent because I enjoy this. It's one of my favorite events in all of sports, and it does take time, but it's absolutely what I love to do. So no burden on my end at all.
All right, Tom, let's take a look now at the rankings. Let's just get to it in the seedings. Yes. And all right, here we go. So first of all, Gonzaga and Baylor, I mean, there's no disputing that they're both going to be top seeds. My question for you to start off with Gonzaga, and it's so unfair every single year because they play in the West Coast Conference. They're not in a power conference. They bulldoze everyone. That how good is this Gonzaga team that when you see, all right, they blow these teams out, they score 80, 90, sometimes 100 a game. We saw them earlier in the season, some of the teams they beat, but how far do you think they can go? Is it just a slam dunk this team is going to go to the Final Four?
Well, nothing is a slam dunk in this tournament, as I'm sure you know. It's the most unpredictable event in all of sports betting. I would say Gonzaga, they're good enough to win this entire tournament. They've got the top offense in the nation. They score more points per game than any other team. They don't play great defense, however. So they worry me a little bit in terms of winning the whole thing, also with the added pressure of going undefeated. So if Gonzaga does enter this tournament undefeated, it's going to be even more difficult in my mind to win it all. But they are good enough to win this whole thing. And so when you're looking at Gonzaga, yes, they can score points. Yes, they have beaten good teams outside of their weak conference. They load up very well in terms of out of conference games. So they've proven themselves, but the burden of going undefeated along with their skeptical defense at best makes me worrisome in terms of picking them to win the whole thing.
Now, on the other side with Baylor, that we saw they survived a scare against Iowa State a few nights ago. They were off a long layoff, and, it's kind of a get-through game for them. They take on West Virginia coming up, which is going to be a very telling game. But what about Baylor? Better conference in the Big 12. How far do you think Scott Drew's team can go?
And they're another team that can win it all. Again, though, going undefeated, entering the tournament is never a good thing. It doesn't matter what sport we're talking about. The pressure of a team going undefeated and maintaining that to the championship is very difficult to accomplish. Baylor does play better defense than Gonzaga, and the offense is not much worse than Gonzaga. So between the two, I would actually lean Baylor for a couple of different reasons. One being that they just play better defense in general than Gonzaga.
Now, looking at the other top seeds, you have Villanova and Michigan yes. plays Iowa coming up tonight. But Michigan with Juwan Howard, he's done a fantastic job, and they actually had a few. What's interesting about Michigan and Villanova, Tom, is that both these teams had COVID stops during the season, and yet they're still going to be top seeds. And Gonzaga had that, and Baylor had that. So in spite of all the stoppages, I know different teams didn't have stoppages. Some had for a game or two. Some had it for a while. But all four of these, if these are the top seeds, all had COVID stoppages. Villanova and Michigan, two teams that have gone far in the tournament before. What do you think about those two and what they can do? Because it feels like they're getting overshadowed by Gonzaga and Baylor.
Well, Michigan is elite with Baylor and Gonzaga. You look at the eye test, the statistical breakdown. Michigan is in that class with Gonzaga and Baylor as being an elite team. I know everyone says Gonzaga, Baylor, than the rest of the country. That's not necessarily the case. It is Gonzaga, Baylor, and Michigan than the rest of the country. It should be worth noting that the committee had Ohio State as the 1 seed over Villanova. However, these change daily for me, and Ohio State is coming off a loss to Michigan, a tough game, but a home loss nonetheless. And Villanova is coming off of an impressive home win against a team that had beaten them already this year in the St. John's Red Storm. So for that reason, I flipped Villanova and Ohio State. That could flip right back after tonight. Ohio State has a big road game against Michigan State. So, between Ohio State and Villanova, I'm not necessarily sold on one being the 1 seed over the other, but I do think Michigan is above both Villanova and Ohio State, and you can make the argument that Michigan deserves to be in the elite class with Gonzaga and Baylor.
Now, taking a look at some of the other teams, at least we talk about the Blue Bloods, Tom, and some of the struggles they've had this year with Duke and Kentucky. Kansas had some issues early in Big 12 play, but it looked like they've fixed that, even though they just lost to Texas in overtime the other night. North Carolina coming off a really bad loss to Marquette. They scheduled the game a few days before. Marquette ran them in Chapel Hill last night. But you have Kansas and North Carolina here. Carolina's an 8 if they played Loyola Chicago, who we've seen them make a Final Four run, and even Kansas on this side in the South, in Michigan's regional. What about those teams that are always the public favorites, the public, I don't want to say darlings, but people that know them very well, but they've had their struggles this season? How much do you trust Carolina or Kansas to even make a little bit of a run?
Not at all. I guess I would trust Kansas a little bit more because they have shown signs of improvement, and then the caliber of talent on Kansas mixed with the experience on that team, there is conviction there. North Carolina is still very young. They're still learning their ways. I would say in a year or two, they're an absolute great pick to go far, but they're just so young that the magnitude of the moment and the teams that they're facing are going to be too much for them. And then you have, to me, impressive quality wins on their resume. Duke just beat Virginia. That, to me, is a huge quality win compared to what UNC has done this year. So I trust Duke and Michigan State if they are to get in because of the improvement they've shown. UNC still has a lot of work to do. They're still very young, and you can say the same thing about Duke being a young team. But again, Duke is showing more to me on the court than in recent games than UNC has really done all season.
Now, taking a look at some of the other matchups that you have, at least in the West, Arkansas ended up beating Alabama last night, and Alabama's a team that could be a 2 seed. And Arkansas has won now, I think it's 8 straight SEC games because they lost to Oklahoma State in the middle there. But what about some of those SEC schools that Alabama is the top team, but are they really the best team? And they've had a couple of road losses to Missouri and also to Arkansas of late. And the Razorbacks just playing extremely well. That your thoughts on the breakdown with these SEC teams and who could make it the furthest out of them?
Well, that did not show last night. And so when you get Alabama away from Tuscaloosa, there is some concern there. And Arkansas, they have steadily progressed in the conference. I would be weary of Tennessee. I'd be weary of LSU. LSU doesn't really have a quality win. If you go through their resume, you could make the argument that LSU does not even belong in the tournament. So I think Arkansas, based off recent play and just getting better, is probably your best bet in the SEC. But Alabama is still the most talented team from top to bottom. You don't really see self-explosions from Alabama like they did last night.
Some of the other teams to look at, Tom, as we scroll through mid-majors. What do you think about some of these mid-majors? Drake is one. You had them against Arkansas. Also, Loyola Chicago. So a couple teams out of the Missouri Valley. And obviously you're going to have a lot of teams that are going to win their conference and get in as an automatic bid. But is there anybody you could see as possibly pulling an upset or two? I'm not going to say a Final Four pick, but someone that can maybe pull an upset out of these mid-majors.
Oh, there's a lot. This is the year of the mid-major, I would argue. Loyola Chicago has the best defense in the entire nation. So anytime you're entering a tournament with that, it bodes well for you. I'm not sure if Western Kentucky will get in. They have a huge game tonight at Houston, but they did beat Alabama this year. Western Kentucky is a quality of team that can get in with an at-large bid. They don't even need to win the Conference USA tournament to get in. They're that good. So Drake, I'm not too sold on, mainly because they're 23-2 record. The only good team they've beaten is Loyola Chicago, and they actually split that series at home. I know Drake is missing some players too. I would be weary on Drake. I think if there's one conference that does stand out where you could pick a few teams to do well, I would say the Mountain West is very under the radar this year. You've got Boise State, you've got Utah State, you've got San Diego State, you've got Colorado State, all good teams. Nevada might sneak in as well. I think when you look at the Mountain West, they seem to have the most under the radar teams. And so that would be one conference I would look at. And then Loyola Chicago, they could make a run. Again, they have the best defense in the nation. They've done it before. So, the hanging fruit is there for anyone who fancies any mid-major team in March Madness this year.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to go over with the brackets, and like you said, they're going to change every day with all these teams and what they're going to do. How much weight are you putting into these conference tournaments, assuming they're going to have them? I mean, obviously, these teams want to have the conference tournaments, but with all the COVID stuff, how much weight are you going to put into teams maybe helping out their resumes by having a good week or a good few days in some of these conference tournaments upcoming?
Yeah, it's only going to be the major conferences where that is possible. When you look at, let's use the MVC as an example, if Drake runs the table and then loses in the championship game, that doesn't really do anything for them because there's not enough quality opponents within that tournament. So this really only applies for a few. You're looking at bubble teams like Maryland, Michigan State, Minnesota. They have to have good runs in the Big Ten tournament, whereas a school like Illinois, they're in regardless. So how they do in the Big Ten tournament doesn't really matter. So really these bubble teams, Stanford is a good example in the Pac-12. They have to have a good Pac-12 tournament. If they lose one or the first or second game, there is the possibility that even though they beat Alabama this year, they might not get in. So when you look at these conference tournaments, they really only apply to a few of the conferences, and then they only apply to a few teams within those conferences. So it's very niche.
Let's take a look at tonight, Tom. And you have Iowa and Michigan. Here we have USC, Colorado as well. We've got a couple of big games inside the Pac-12. But let's focus on Iowa, Michigan for a second. That, like you mentioned, Iowa, they're a team that's obviously been very good. And now they go to Ann Arbor. Michigan's laying 4.5. Wolverines off this big win over Ohio State a few days ago. And Iowa's been tested on the road, and they passed a lot of those road tests this year. What do you think here about Iowa and Michigan tonight?
Well, I do think Michigan, they are the better team right off the bat. So they should win this game. I think 4 points is fine. 3 is fine for that matter. If I've seen a few odds go up and down. Anywhere between 3 and 5, I think is fine taking the Wolverines on. You have to understand, Iowa, they do score a lot of points. They also give up a lot of points. You're talking about a defense that ranks in the bottom 200 nationally for points allowed per game. Michigan is way too good of an offense, and they're coached very well to not score points, especially at home against Iowa. I will say that Fran McCaffrey, he has made it very known throughout the season that the defense has to get better for Iowa. It's like, we have the Wooden Award winner. We're going to make the tournament. We're a top contender in one of the best conferences. We're putting up 90 points a game, but we don't play defense, and that is a huge concern. When you go to Iowa's last few games, they're not even giving up 70 points to opponents. So I don't know if Iowa, if it's like, okay, the message is clear. We are playing defense, or it's just a few good games on defense, because now they're traveling on the road against one of the best offenses in the nation, let alone one of the best teams in the nation. So I think the true test for Iowa's defense is tonight. They don't even have to win this game, but if they can hold Michigan to 70 points or less, I would consider that a huge win for Iowa's defense. I like Michigan to win. I like Michigan to cover. But this is going to be a good game to eye the Hawkeyes defense to see how it might translate when they go into the tournament, because they're going to be a popular pick, but they give up a lot of points, so they're susceptible to an upset. This is a good game to see exactly where Fran McCaffrey's defense stands.
And what about in the Pac-12, Tom? You have UCLA and Utah as one of the key games, also Oregon and Stanford. So what do you think about some of them? Because Oregon coming off this really ugly loss to USC on Monday in a makeup game, and also UCLA is 1-8 against the spread their last 9. They're a short favorite against Utah, and Utah has played a lot of road games recently. What are your thoughts on some of those games out west?
Yeah, there's a lot of big games. USC Colorado is a massive game in Boulder as well. You mentioned USC beating Oregon at home. USC is a very good team. I'm not sure number 19 in the country actually does service to what USC has accomplished this season. They're a very efficient team on both sides of the court, offense and defense. And so I honestly don't think too much of that Oregon loss. Yeah, it wasn't close. Or USC started off, what was it, like a 15-0 run in that game. I don't put too much into that Oregon loss. I think Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Colorado they could beat any team in the country. So I think when you look at the Pac-12, those would be the 4 teams that stand out. USC is much better than advertised. Colorado is much better than advertised. This is a team that's 17-7. They haven't really missed any games because of COVID, so they've had a very consistent season throughout, and they're littered with experience. They have tons of juniors and seniors. McKinley Wright might be the best player in the Pac-12, not talked about enough. I don't see any of those 4 teams, dropping out of the tournament based on what happens in these last few games. I think Stanford is really the only team that has to win. They're at home against Oregon tonight. This game means way more to Stanford than it does Oregon. If Oregon loses to Stanford tonight, they're in the tournament. If Stanford loses tonight, they're probably out with the way Duke, Michigan State, and a few of these other bubble teams are playing. So this is an enormous game tonight for Stanford at home.
Tom Cunningham, great work, VegasInsider.com, joining us here on the Daily Insider. And Tom, we'll talk to you again probably next week at an update on bracketology. And we got a lot going on with March Madness coming up soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
All right, there is Tom Cunningham as we continue here on the Daily Insider. As the NBA, we want to go over that. And we talked a lot of college with Tom. But the NBA, though, looking back at last night, there's so much to go over from that Wednesday card inside the NBA. And let's first take a look at the finals from last night. Golden State ended up holding off Indiana 111-107. And Golden State got some revenge they had lost to Indiana at home earlier in the season. And now the Warriors have won 2 in a row, and this is key for tomorrow against Charlotte. That Golden State, when you look back at it, they've won 2. They've not won 3 straight this season. So that's going to be curious tomorrow. Look at this. I always love this system. 4 on the road, 1 at home, back on the road again for 4. I know it's not a long trip from Golden State to L.A., or from San Francisco to LA. But that one, Charlotte, revenge spot. Golden State just won the last 2. Be really curious to see what Golden State is laying in that game against Charlotte tomorrow night. But good for the Warriors, though, coming off the 2 losses to start off the road trip. And they win the last 2 against the Knicks and the Pacers to return home. And Indiana, who had been off for about a week, they had 1 game postponed against the Rockets due to the snowstorm in Texas. But again, Indiana, they're just, I feel like, struggling to find any kind of consistency. They really are. And that's a team that hasn't won 3 in a row since they started 3-0. So Indiana also kind of having those issues. They're just not going to catch Milwaukee. It's not going to happen. The Heat and the Raptors, they actually played to an over for the first time in 3 meetings because the Heat Raptors played 2 in Tampa that both stayed under. Now they go way over. I mean, you have a 67-point first quarter. Pretty much puts you in cruise control for that. But the Heat, though, they've actually played well of late. When you look at how the road trip wasn't going well. They lost 3 in a row. Now they've won 4 straight, beating Sacramento, holding off the Lakers, holding Oklahoma City to 94 points, and then beating Toronto. Now they got a big test with Utah coming up, and we'll talk about the Jazz in a second, because Utah, hottest team in the world right now. But at least the Heat, though, they've kind of come back to life here because they had this 4-game winning streak also in February. So they've gone 4 straight wins, 3 straight losses, 4 straight wins. So now they're playing better. And Toronto, who had a nice little winning streak, now they've dropped 2 in a row to Philly and Miami. And the Raptors now with a couple games at home that, I mean, you would think they should win. And Boston has been terrible of late. So this is not exactly a daunting task for the Raptors. And as you see, the schedule filled in yesterday as the NBA announced the second half of the season. So now we know the rest of the games for the remainder of the season. The Houston Rockets are a team that, I mean, you talk about just losing James Harden. He didn't want to be there anymore. And they had this little winning streak here towards the end of January. Since Christian Wood got hurt, I mean, they've been horrible. And I can't necessarily say they've been the worst team in basketball because Sacramento has lost 8 straight. But the Rockets, how do you lay 5.5 and lose 112-96 at Cleveland? And Cleveland had played the night before at home against Atlanta, 1-1, and then they jump out to a 10-point lead early. Houston's up at the half, and then you just get rolled in the second half by this Cavs team. So Cleveland, who had gone on a 10-game skid, 0-13 against the spread, now they've won and covered 2 straight. Speaking of bad teams right now, the Boston Celtics, they're a bad team. They've lost 3 in a row, and I know you can say, well, they're up 24 at New Orleans. Luka hit the 2 threes at the end against Dallas, so they were right there, but they just totally didn't even show up against Atlanta last night. Gave up 127 to the Hawks, who are not good defensively, and yet you score only 112 on Atlanta. So the Hawks have beaten the Celtics 2 of 3 times. We're going to give them credit for that one. And Atlanta, again, off a win, going to Oklahoma City is going to be tricky because loss. So the Hawks have not put together back-to-back wins since January. So we'll keep an eye on that one too. San Antonio loses at Oklahoma City on a buzzer-beating 3. And the Thunder, who have not been great at home, at least now playing a little better at home. I mean, it's kind of up and down. They beat Milwaukee here. They beat Minnesota, beat Houston. But also, they started off poorly at home. They played better at home, relatively better, of late. And they snapped, they had a little skid here, 0-3 against the spread. They covered at Cleveland and then now split the last 2. This one really burns if you had the Minnesota Timberwolves last night. So if you caught the end of this game, and again, you see this back and forth affair. Minnesota had been very competitive for a while. They get blown out by the Bucks. All right, so be it. All right. But the close losses to the Lakers, Pacers, Raptors, Knicks, all hanging around. You're getting 4.5 at Chicago. The Bulls have been playing very well. Chicago goes up 3. Minnesota's got the ball late. And Kobe White of the Bulls is trying to foul Ricky Rubio. Trying to foul to have Minnesota take the ball out on the sideline. It turns out that the whistle wasn't blown immediately, and then Kobe White got kind of locked up with Rubio. He throws him a 3-pointer that wasn't even close, but they call a foul on Kobe White. And Rubio goes to the line. He's an 84% free throw shooter in his career, hits all 3. They go to overtime. So if you have Minnesota, that's not what you wanted. You wanted at least a shot at the end to not make it, lose by 3, go home, and you win. So now they go to overtime. Chicago outscores them 14-7, and they win by 7. I mean, those are the worst. If you have the underdog going to overtime, then the favorite ends up covering. But give the Bulls credit, though. They keep winning, and maybe they're not beating the best competition in the world. Minnesota, Houston, Sacramento, Detroit, Indiana's a good team. But Billy D has done a good job there with the Bulls recently. You know, they hung that Philly game last week. So Chicago's been competitive. I mean, they're not going to catch Milwaukee, but they have definitely been pretty good of late. New Orleans holds off Detroit. Jeremy Grant didn't play in this game, so it's pretty surprising that the Pistons put up 69 in the first half without their best player. And again, we can't say Blake Griffin because Blake Griffin's going to get traded. He's not even playing right now. But the Pelicans, they have another over. All right? Look at all these overs for the Pelicans. I mean, just racking them up and giving up a bunch of points every game. They have not been a good favorite at home, and it showed again that they don't cover against Detroit in this win by 10. I know they were laying 9.5, and if you got it 9.5, then you won, but they closed 11.5 with Jeremy Grant out. But the Pistons, though, now they've covered 2 straight. If that means anything. This game, I feel like I'm a little upset with myself because I should have seen this one. That Charlotte ends up going to Phoenix and beating the Suns. They blow a double-digit lead at Utah a few nights earlier. Utah, we know what they are. We're going to talk about them in a second with their game against the Lakers. But they go to Phoenix. They hold off the Suns by 3. And you see Charlotte, they've been kind of up and down. I mean, no sustained losing streak since about the middle of January. That Charlotte, they've been competitive for the most part this season. But they go to Phoenix. This is why I'm upset. Because this was a spot to go against the Suns. Not necessarily back Charlotte, but go against the Suns. They won 3 straight. They played tremendous offensively. They had the big fourth quarter against New Orleans. Big start against Memphis. Big second half against Portland. Now you're playing Charlotte before you go on the road for a few games. They had been hot at home. They blew the Nets game. Then maybe Charlotte or Phoenix was a little overvalued against the Hornets. So there are those spots in the NBA season that you try to find. I know it's easy in hindsight to say, well, you should have taken Charlotte last night. But coming off the Portland game, big Western Conference game, now you're facing Charlotte, Eastern Conference team, up and down. And the Hornets, after a bit of a, well, I can't say a slow start, but after they were down 4 after 1, they chip away. And then pretty much you're good plus 9.5 as long as you avoid overtime. And to wrap up the night, a lot of people were saying, oh, look at LeBron and the Lakers are getting 9. So you got to take the Lakers because you never get LeBron as that big of an underdog. But the Lakers just aren't playing well. But on the flip side, too, I'm not going to go to the Lakers lost because they're not playing well. The Jazz just continue to beat up these teams. They win by 25, by 22, by 18, 11, 14, 14, 17, and they had the 8 there at Indiana, 21, 12. Like all of these games that Utah is winning, they are just blowing teams out. Utah's not sneaking by these teams anymore. And considering they haven't lost a home game in 2021, now they go on the road. They get the Heat, who've been playing better. Orlando, I mean, they're still shorthanded. I mean, Utah's the best team in the league right this second. New Orleans and Philly, this will be an interesting game going to Philadelphia on March 3rd. And then you have the All-Star break, and Utah's got a bunch of road games here. But there's no reason to really think. I mean, look at this. Memphis a couple times, Cleveland, Chicago, Orlando. Here's the big boy. March 24th, that one in Salt Lake City. Now, remember, the Nets played the Jazz earlier this season, but that was January 5th. They lost by 34. That game, you had no Harden yet. He wasn't traded there, and you had Durant and Kyrie out. So that was really a poor representation as far as those two teams playing each other. NBA Finals preview. We always say there's an NBA Finals preview. If it's the Clippers and the Nets, if it's the Jazz and the Nets, if it's the Lakers and the Bucks, everything's an NBA Finals preview. But for Utah to do what they've been doing and hitting all these threes, it's amazing. It really is. And the Lakers, on the flip side, that's now 4 straight losses for them. And they wrap up the first half with 3 at home, then the Kings. Portland, Golden State, and Phoenix. Those are 3 tests. I mean, Portland coming off back-to-back losses to the Nuggets and the Suns. Golden State still with Steph and Draymond. And Phoenix, the road's not getting easier for the Lakers right now with that Anthony Davis. And that's not taken away from LeBron, but LeBron, we've seen him so many times in his career, just him. And it's not enough with just him, that he needs that second superstar to help him out. Let's take a quick look at Thursday's NBA. And you only have 6 games tonight, which actually, I say only 6. You used to have 2 in the past on Thursdays. But Dallas-Philly is a really intriguing game. Sixers back at home, 13-2 at home. They split these 2 games with Toronto, but they continue to play well. This Portland game was kind of a weird one without Damian Lillard. Also, Ben Simmons didn't play, but how they lost that one earlier in the season. And their other home loss came to Denver, but that's really unfair because the Sixers had everyone out because of COVID. So that's really not a fair representation of one of their home losses. But they get Dallas, and the Mavericks all of a sudden now, they have a little bit of momentum. They're back at 500, and they just beat Memphis and Boston at home. And now they start this little road trip. They got Brooklyn coming up. So, again, now eyes open up when we talk about the Brooklyn Nets, and they get the Magic tonight at home. And Brooklyn, look at what they've done. They're winning. They're covering every single game. And Sacramento looked to be a letdown spot. 1-point game in the fourth quarter. Nets go on a run. Cover again. Laying 5.5. And the Brooklyn Nets right now, this little stretch here, favored tonight. I mean, they'll be favored in all these games, but the next test, really, Portland, Utah, for all these games. I mean, even the Celtics, you can't trust them. I mean, Brooklyn can go on a crazy run. I don't know about a Utah run, but a crazy run moving forward. And Orlando hung with Brooklyn when they played them. This was January 16th after James Harden got acquired, 122-115 as 9.5-point dogs. They lost, but the Magic covered. And Orlando just lost to Detroit a few nights ago. Not really shocking there, but as far as on the road for Orlando, they just haven't really been that good. So you would think Brooklyn, I mean, look at this. Look at that, 1%, 99%. But why would you go the other way? Like, why would you think that Orlando could be a play against Brooklyn when Brooklyn has just been so automatic? And they're doing without Kevin Durant. I'm not saying they don't need Kevin Durant in the long run, but right now they don't need him. Knicks and Kings at the Garden. This is a revenge game for the Knicks. They lost at Sacramento last month. They were up at the half, and then their offense did nothing in the second half. Sacramento's been terrible. They covered 8 straight, and now they have lost 8 straight. I wonder if you've ever seen that. 8-0 ATS run, then an 0-8 ATS run. Can't think that's very common. And the Kings get a couple winnable games that they can win potentially. Is that a little nicer than winnable? Against the Knicks and Pistons, and you know they get blown out. Well, I shouldn't say get blown out. Lose by 13 at Milwaukee, but they were there was a distance there between those two teams. And then Brooklyn, they gave a good effort against the Nets, but look, you need to have your A-plus game against the Nets, and unless Kyrie and Harden are terrible, look, they still give 127. Still give up a ton of points in all these games. And the Knicks are coming off this loss to the Warriors a few nights ago, and they were there, but Golden State pulled away at the end. So now we'll see what Tibbs and the Knicks do tonight against the Kings. And the last few is a favorite for New York. Actually, haven't been that bad. Held off Minnesota. Well, they lost to Orlando here, but won at Washington. Beat Cleveland convincingly by a couple losses up here. Look, pick your poison. You know, if you want Sacramento with all of these games that they have lost of late, do what you will with that. Clippers and Memphis, LA on the road now. They are a huge favorite against the Grizzlies, coming off this blowout of Washington. Now they get a couple with the Grizz and then Milwaukee, Boston. But the Clippers and Memphis have not played yet this year. And the Clippers, they've been good on the road, as you see of late. This game, they didn't have Kawhi or Paul George. This game, they didn't have Kawhi or Paul George. They still ended up beating the Heat. But now they're getting, with their guys back, they lost this shootout to the Nets. But, look, you see they've beaten T-Wolves, Bulls, Cavs. These are not playoff teams. And Memphis, they're kind of in that play-in game, maybe, or play-in series, whatever you want to call it, coming up towards the end. They were in it last year. We'll see if they do it again this year. Memphis coming off a couple losses where the offense did nothing, and now they get the Clippers. Let's see, as a home dog, they get run by Phoenix, run by New Orleans, run by Toronto. Not exactly a lot of faith in Memphis as a home dog. Beat Phoenix here. Brooklyn, I think Kyrie was out of that game too. So Kyrie and Durant were out of that game, so wasn't a lot there to really go off of. Denver and Washington, these teams just played a few days ago, and the Wizards beat the Nuggets 130-128 as 4.5-point underdogs. Denver was up at the end of the first quarter. The Washington just took care of business after that. Wizards had their 5-game winning streak snapped by the Clippers, and now they wrap up the road trip tonight. And this is, again, another game where Denver's laying 7.5 off a big win against Portland. I mean, Oklahoma City, it's not the same Thunder team, but they haven't really been great at home as a favorite. Let me put that out there because they beat the Lakers here. Didn't cover against the Blazers, didn't cover against the Thunder, took care of Cleveland, who hasn't. But before that, home favorite, they beat Oklahoma City and Golden State. But here, Minnesota, Dallas, Phoenix. Denver they don't have the same domination at home as they had before. New Orleans, Milwaukee wraps up the night. That's the late TNT game. And revenge game for Giannis and the Bucks. 131-126 loss to the Pelicans back on January 29th, the 7-point favorites. They scored 81 in the second half of that game. So imagine how, I don't want to say bad they played in the first half, but you dig yourself a hole. They were down 20-something at the half. 23 at the half was the number. New Orleans up 23 at the half and then had to hold off Milwaukee in the second half. But the Bucks they picked it up, though. They had the 5-game losing streak, but now 13-point win, 13-point win, 27-point win, the last three. And the Bucks 12-0 straight up, 10-2 against the spread as a home favorite of 8 or more this year. So when they're a big home favorite, they take care of business. And in some of the lower ones, 7.5, 6 against the Raptors, lost both them, lost to the Lakers up here, lost to the Jazz. So something to keep an eye on with Milwaukee. Again, big favorite at home, look to back them. Less than a big favorite, maybe go against them. And here's the spot, Clippers and Nuggets. These two, maybe keep an eye on those because they will not be laying 10 points in each of those games. So maybe you fade the Bucks in one or both of them. I can't imagine the Bucks will cover both those games. Coming up with the Clippers and Nuggets, then they get the Grizzlies on the All-Star break. So that's the look at the NBA for this evening. And we talk college basketball with our friend Tom Cunningham as well. Iowa, Michigan coming up this evening. Also another interesting game, Western Kentucky and Houston. That's one of those extra games built in because Western Kentucky, they wanted to help themselves in Conference USA and help out their chances to make the tournament. So you schedule Houston, and Houston didn't have anybody to play. And really, you got nothing to lose. Houston's fine. They're going to win the American. They're fine if they lose this game. This isn't like a North Carolina Marquette situation where North Carolina couldn't afford losses. Houston's fine. Western Kentucky can only help themselves, and if they lose, they lost to Houston. So be it. And you have Ohio State, Michigan State. We'll see if the Spartans stay hot, which is something that's not been said a lot this season. USC, Colorado, really good game in the Pac-12. So that is the look there. And also check out some of our handicappers. Joe Williams, he's been on fire inside of college basketball. MIT Simulator in the NBA. You could find our buy picks pages. Go to NBA and buy picks. And Brian Edwards also, he's done well too. 3-0 yesterday. He's done well with the totals. And Michael Roberts still leading the way in MIT Simulator in second. But we have our picks for purchase over here in the NBA. And then you look at college basketball. And Greg Smith also on a nice run inside college hoops. And a lot of college basketball tonight. And we still got a lot of college basketball for the next few weeks before we get to the conference tournament and before we get to the NCAA tournament. So that is the look at all of that stuff. So, again, thank you. We appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate Tom Cunningham for hopping on. We'll talk to him again plenty as we get closer to March Madness. And you could find the Daily Insider on our YouTube channel at Vegas Insider. You could find that. If you missed it, it came in late, then you can always see the replay of it later. And we talk about the bracketology there with Tom. So, again, we thank him for hopping on. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks again for watching the Daily Insider right here on VegasInsider.com.